Today, our topic is the Korea-United States Enduring Alliance, and it's one of our most important relationships, has been and will continue to be. It's been grounded, as we all know, on very fundamental shared interests of our two countries since World War II. We also know that there are times and places upon which nations will always have different approaches and different strategies, and sometimes these can be most significant. And indeed, at the moment, there are questions of nuclear weapons, there's a question of unification of the Koreas, huge matters before us. And so we're especially fortunate to have with us to discuss these matters the ambassador of the Republic of Korea to the United States. Ambassador Yang is a political scientist and a statesman. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Seoul University and his Master of Arts degree from the University of Hawaii and his PhD from the University of Kentucky. He's taught both at the University of Kentucky and the University of Indiana, and he's also taught at two universities in Korea, including, again, Seoul National University. He served as the head of political science associations here in the United States, the Korean North American Association, I should say, and of the International Studies Association in Korea. During his time as an academic, he also advised his government in several ways. He's been an advisor to the he's been on the advisory committees of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of National Defense, and the Unification Committee. He served in the National Assembly, and there was a vice chair of the Unification and Foreign Affairs Committee. His career has clearly been both in academia, where I should note he has published a book with a profoundly important subject matter. It's a comparative study of the political systems of North and South Korea. And that, combined with his attention to unification matters, gives you an obvious nexus of beliefs. It's my enormous pleasure to present the distinguished ambassador of the Republic of Korea to the United States, Ambassador Yang Sung-Chul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bird, for such a kind introduction. Yesterday I was in the winter outfit, and then I discovered it was almost a summer. So this morning I told my wife, what's the weather in Baltimore? And she told me that it's about 75 degrees. So for the first time this year that I took the summer outfit, and I found out that it's still somehow in between spring and winter or something. President Frank Byrd, members of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to be invited to speak here. I am sorry that heavy snow last month prevented me from coming. America and its allies are now at war with Iraq, and the Republic of Korea will soon send non-combat troops to Iraqi theater. Korea is also currently aiding US-led campaign in Afghanistan. I have been a student of the social sciences for many years and learned that true meaning comes from differences. And the differences come from a comparison. A little bit pedantic, but I agree with Aristotle that all scientific inquiry is comparative. I have identical twin nieces. Though I cannot tell them apart sometimes, their parents can readily recognize one from the other. I was happy to hear President Bush saying in his State of the Union address this year that, quote, different threat requires different strategies, end of quote. In juxtaposing North Korea with Iraq, President George Bush discerned that the Iraqi issue is a military showdown, North Korea a diplomatic showdown. Each country is unique, and each situation demands a different approach. During the Cold War era, Brzezinski and Huntington once wrote that, quote, human mind craves simple distinctions. Russians, Americans, and Europeans have their own motives for embracing the black and white approach. To be sure, such Manichaean tendency is not confined just to them, but is almost universal. I recall George Kennan's keen observation that, quote, diversity in all the glorious disorder of nature is the best defense of the healthy society, end of quote. Speaking of Mr. Kennan, now 99 years old, the architect of America's post-World War II containment policy, still writes and gives advice. Just last week, I read his succinct yet profound letter to the editor on Iraq in the Washington Post. I may be breaking some rule because Baltimore Sun is so famous here. More than a decade ago, the Soviet Union was dissolved. Germany was reunited, and Eastern Europe was reborn. The Cold War, in fact, became a relic of history, except in the Korean Peninsula. Among the remaining communist countries, China has continued its reforms for more than two decades. Vietnam is steadily changing, and even Cuba is struggling to change. In the Korean Peninsula, too, thanks to the visionary leadership of former President Kim Dae-jung, the Nobel Peace winner in year 2000, and his persistent and patient engagement policy toward North Korea for the last 5 years, a paradigm shift has occurred in inter-Korean relations. In my brief remarks, I would like to address two issues: the rapidly unfolding North Korean question and the enduring relationship between Korea and the United States. Before doing so, however, let me call your attention to the following developments taking place on the Korean Peninsula. The transportation corridors are now open to allow South Korean tourists into the north through the demilitarized zone. For the first time, separated families from the south have passed through the DMZ to meet their relatives in the north. The East and West Coast rail links, we call it Iron Silk Road project. This East and West Coast rail links through the DMZ will also be reconnected soon. After nearly 60 years of territorial division and human separation on the Korean Peninsula, this linking is comparable, in my opinion, in symbolism and substance to the beginning of the crumbling of the Berlin Wall. Bearing in mind these inter-Korean developments, let me say a few words on North Korea's nuclear issue, which is currently grabbing international headlines. As this issue unfolds, the Sunshine Policy many people who are too critical to sunshine policy, sometimes I ask them, do you need moonshine policy instead of sunshine policy? Sunshine policy, officially a policy of reconciliation and cooperation toward North Korea, has become more, not less, relevant. It is dialogue and diplomacy firmly rooted in deterrence, which is the most practical and rational response to this latest North Korean challenge. The fundamentals of the engagement policy are irreversible and irrevocable. To put it differently, domestic, economic, and political reforms and the engagement policy toward the North for the last 5 years have been a seismic shift. President Roh Moo-hyun vowed to continue the engagement policy of peace and prosperity. He laid out 4 key principles. First, South will engage with the North through dialogue. Second, the inter-Korean dialogue will take place within a spirit of mutual trust and reciprocity. Third, both halves should be the principal players in inter-Korean relations with the concomitant support of the international community. Finally, the new government's inter-Korean policy will be pursued with popular consensus. In this regard, President Roh's administration has vowed to enhance government transparency, expand citizen participation, and secure bipartisan support of its policies. Having said this, I would like to state my government's current position on the North Korean nuclear issue. Again, 4 points are in order. 1, North Korea's nuclear weapons program, both uranium and plutonium-based, is unacceptable under any circumstances and should be irreversibly dismantled in a prompt and verifiable manner. 2, North Korea is urged to fully comply with the safeguard obligations of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This issue is now in the hands of the UN Security Council. 3, my government reaffirms its commitment to the South-North Joint Declaration on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and urges North Korea to do the same. 4, North Korea should refrain from any further actions which might escalate tensions on the Korean Peninsula. My government, the United States, and Japan agree in principle that North Korea's nuclear issue should be resolved peacefully and diplomatically through a multilateral framework in which the United States and others engage in dialogue with North Korea on bilateral issues as well. On March 13, as well as this morning, President Roh and Bush reaffirmed in a telephone conversation that both countries will continue to seek peaceful resolution of this issue through diplomacy and close consultation. This morning, President Bush called and had a conversation with President Roh about this issue. This broad formula is definitely the right path and a good option for North Korea. North Korea may, however, refuse to accept it. Worse still, in the meantime, we may be unable to diffuse or de-escalate tensions. Above all, the special status of the United States, acquired and maintained through more than half a century of sacrifices and contributions to my country and to the region, may be impaired. Therefore, we must quickly find some triggering mechanisms to break the stalemate and induce North Korea into accepting this broad formula. This problem will be resolved by resuming dialogue rather than by searching for proper modalities. As President Roh stated recently, a comprehensive solution to the North Korean question is urgently needed but mutual mistrust stands in the way. One way to overcome this stumbling block is to provide North Korea with a security guarantee and economic assistance. In turn, North Korea must abandon its nuclear weapons program and missiles and other weapons of mass destruction. The Republic of Korea, the United States, Japan, along with China, Russia, the EU, and other concerned countries must coordinate and cooperate with each other to achieve these goals. As the saying goes, it is better to be late than never to choose the right course. Time is critical. It favors neither side. Talk is better than no talk, and negotiation is no concession. What counts is the substance and the results of the negotiation. If over half a century of our cumulative track record of engaging North Korea is any guide, the inter-Korean peace process, North Korea-Japan, and North Korea-U.S. dialogues, for that matter, have never been linear but cyclical. These processes have encountered ups and downs, temporary progress, and setbacks. Over time, the cycle of dialogue and reconciliation have given way to deadlocks and confrontation, and vice versa. One consistent pattern has emerged, however. With the passing of time, the dialogue and conciliatory mode have prevailed in scope and depth. In sum, no matter how urgent or grave the North Korea's nuclear issue is, the prudent policy must put the following three factors in a proper perspective: the inter-Korean realities, the regional security complexities, and the United States' strategic imperatives as the sole hyperpower. A balanced understanding of North Korea's nuclear issue is possible when both Korea's economy is placed in an historical perspective. When the two separate regimes emerged in 1948, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world, with a per capita income of around $40. United States was about $1,600 then. In 1980, South Korea's per capita income was around $1,600, while that of the North was $750. 20 years later, by the year 2000, South Korea's per capita income was nearly $10,000, while that of North Korea remained still $750. United States, as you know, is about $36,000. The disparity between the South and North is staggering. As mentioned earlier, South Korea is now world's 11th largest economy. Russia is 17th, according to World Development annual publications. And South Korea is a member of the OECD. In contrast, North Korea has become one of the world's poorest countries, as well as world's, believe it or not, largest food aid recipient. Within North Korea, the extreme contrast between its military situation and economic condition is startling. While its economy is in shambles, North Korea's nuclear weapons program, weapons of mass destruction, including missile development, biological and chemical weapons, not to mention its conventional forces, are menacing. North Korea has the world's 5th largest military, of which about 70% are deployed south of the Pyongyang-Wonsan line facing South Korea. Why is South Korea so economically competitive in an increasingly IT-oriented economy, while North Korea remains a poverty and famine-stricken state? After more than half a century, why has South Korea developed as an exemplary model of emerging nations, politically and economically, while North Korea remained an economic basket case and concurrently one of the most heavily militarized garrison states. Korean people in both halves still speak the same language and share the same culture and heritage, despite having lived under the two diametrically opposed political and economic systems for nearly 60 years since the division. In brief, the acute contrast between South and North Korea stems from their fundamentally different leadership types and policy choices, let alone basic regime and system differences. Both the South and North today dramatically demonstrate how such factors can influence the fate of a country and well-being of its people. Ultimately then, a country's regime and system, its leadership type and policy choices it makes are decisive in determining a nation's prosperity or poverty. I would like to now focus on the enduring friendship and solidarity between Korea and the United States. The Korea-U.S. relationship has been long-standing. Along with Japan, Korea appeared in the U.S. congressional record in 1845 as a, quote, highly recommended trading partner, end of quote. The Kingdom of Korea signed the Treaty of Peace, Amity, and Commerce and Navigation 121 years ago in 1882. Since the Korean division in the wake of World War II, Korea and America have had exemplary bilateral relations for nearly 60 years. We have fought shoulder to shoulder during the Korean War in the 1950s against the communist aggression under the United Nations flag, and again in Vietnam in the mid-60s and mid-70s, again against communist aggression. In the wake of September 11, the Republic of Korea has been actively supporting US-led campaign in Afghanistan. As I mentioned earlier, Korean National Assembly passed a resolution to send non-combatant troops to Iraqi theater just 2 days ago. Korea will also contribute financially and take part in humanitarian relief operations in the region. Incidentally, this year, our two countries will celebrate 3 milestones. The centennial of Korean immigration to the United States, January 13 of year 1903, 103 Koreans immigrated to Hawaii as a sugar plantation workers. So this January, last January, was the 100 years anniversary. Also, the 50th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement and the Republic of Korea-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty. Both countries now share core values of democracy, free market economy, and human rights. As mentioned earlier, America is Korea's #1 trading partner and investor. For America, Korea is her #7 trading partner after Canada, Mexico, Japan, China, Germany, Britain, and #4 agricultural market after Canada, Mexico, Japan. Even at this moment, 37,000 American soldiers are stationed to safeguard the security and stability of the Korean Peninsula and the region. In closing, I would like to shed some light on the so-called anti-Americanism in Korea. Labeling what is taking place in Korea now as anti-Americanism is a misnomer. People everywhere have short memories. Demonstrations and protests against the US policies and attacks against the US embassies and other office buildings were far more frequent and violent during the days of authoritarian military regimes than they are now. By contrast, the recent demonstrations have been mostly peaceful and issue-specific. I do not deny that some segment of the Korean population are anti-American, but they represent a tiny minority. Majority of the Korean people is grateful to Americans for all their sacrifices and contributions to our country. To put it differently, the country to country, people to people, and government to government relations between our two countries are fundamentally healthy and sound. Ladies and gentlemen, our two nations must renew our relationship from a fresh perspective. We need mutual empathy. First step towards such empathy is recognizing the fundamental changes in the demographic, political, economic, and security landscapes of both nations. Over 80% of the South Korean population now belongs to what we call the post-Korean War generation. They are young, assertive, independent, highly educated, IT-friendly, relatively affluent, predominantly of urban upbringing, and free from the baggage of Cold War ideology. Democracy and free market economy have now taken firm root in Korea. Above all, our relations with China, Russia, EU, and other countries have changed fundamentally in depth, scope, and direction since the Cold War. For example, this year is 11th year of formal diplomatic relations with China. But China last year has become our number 2 trading partner, surpassing Japan. These are the real changes. Koreans, on the other hand, must recognize that today America is the sole hyperpower. By next year, for example, I read the US defense spending will equal that of the rest of the world put together. That is the defense budget of 191 other countries. This is the reality. Above all, Koreans must understand the extent to which the horror of September 11 has affected the core of American psyche. The political, psychological, economic, security reverberations of this fateful event are still unfolding in America and beyond. The stronger partnership between our two nations for this century and beyond can and will be forged only when we pay a close attention to each other's rapidly changing needs and realities. Ultimately, however, I believe that the universal appeal of America comes from its liberty, diversity, openness, and opportunity. God bless Korea, America, and all freedom-loving people around the world. Thank you.
The question is historically and
I heard it. Yeah.
and practically, what are the sources of division? And the second part of the question, what are the prospects for unification?
The first question is a long story. We need a couple of books to answer that. But technically, the not current DMZ, which was drawn after the armistice agreement in the wake of Korean War, the first 38th parallel was drawn by U.S. government in 1945, to be exact, about August 12th. It's very complicated, but the Russians were already had landed in north of 38th parallel, so America was sort of compelled to draw the line. Yeah. But beyond that, it's very complicated. The second question that Germany, in German case, as you know, that East Germany was absorbed by West Germany in a very quick, rapid procession. But the Korean situation is quite different. And we learned the lessons from Germany, because that quick absorption has created enormous economic and other problems. So we try to resolve this Korean question through gradual, peaceful, and in a piecemeal way. So that's what the Sunshine Policy is all about. And I'm glad that I can report to you that the current new government is also basically following the same way, that is peaceful way, in a gradual manner, and solving easier questions first before the harder questions, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Would you comment on the decision of the Chinese government in February to cut off their oil supplies to North Korea for a limited
I think
time?
the correct answer should come from Chinese authorities, isn't it? But in the light of this North Korea's nuclear issue standoff, maybe it has some implications, but again, I mean, it's Chinese authority must answer that question. Yeah.
What is the practical use of the North
Right.
Korean military from their standpoint?
Well, as I said, that there are structural security complexity has changed for about 10 years. That is, until 12 years ago, Korea has no relations with China or Russia. But now we have significant relations, especially in economic and other areas, with Russia as well as China. And North Korea, in the meantime, so until, say, 1980s, any South Koreans, or even anybody who knows about North Korea, what is your image of North Korea or reality of North Korea? They will say North Korea is a just militant warmongering regime or state. But probably many Americans or many South Koreans today, the image of North Korea comes first with this desperately hungry and North Korean refugees who try to get into foreign embassies in Beijing. And that's a reality, that 1/3 of North Korean population are now under foreign food aid. So these are the second urgent humanitarian image North Korea is producing. Third image, as I mentioned, that thanks to the leadership of former President Kim Dae-jung, we have engaged North Korea very vigorously for the last 5 years. Let me give you one example. Until 1998, only 50 people had a North-South Korean family reunions. That was in 1985. That's it. But under the President Kim Dae-jung's government, 70,000 people had a reunion of families between North and South. We still have nearly 5 million people who want to see each other. According to the South Korean Red Cross, some 100,000 people registered to see their families and relatives in the North. So these are the situation. And also 500,000 South Koreans toured the scenic mountain called Mount Kumgang, Mount Diamond in North. We have never dreamt that it could have happened for the last 5 years. These are the fundamental changes we have. So to give you a short answer, these are the enormous changes, which is very different from the earlier images we had during the Cold War days. Yeah.
You mentioned that probably was a minority of the
I already
Korean
mentioned that
population.
only tiny minority. Yeah.
And the question then would be, focusing on that tiny minority, what is their cause of anti-Americanism?
Even those tiny minority has different reasons for being anti-American. Some people maybe for immediate personal reasons, such as happen to be their living space or the villages near the U.S. military exercises, so they hate the noises of military exercises. Or their resident may be very near to the military base, and falsely or rightly, they claim that some military base polluted the areas and things like that. So it's very difficult to just single out what are their causes. But let me assure you that Korean people love America, and people-to-people relations are still sound. And last year, for instance, 700,000 South Koreans came to the United States, and 500,000 Americans went to Korea. So it's a big exchange of traffics and cultural exchange and people-to-people exchanges. So we don't hate. It's a misnomer, yeah.
Please comment on the state of mind of people in North Korea.
Right, that's the, you raised the most fundamental questions. We also learned through the experience of East and West Germany that politically and legally it's easy or quick to unite, but the mentality of so-called Westies and what they call Aussies was so fundamentally different because they went through such a different political socialization and deprogramming. It's very difficult. And it's what you can say it's an extreme case in North Korea, that no country is more regimented and regulated and brainwashed than North Korea has been for the last 60 years or so. So that's a fundamental question. That's why that if we look at from American standard or Western standard or outside standard, we can expect some reasonable reactions or response we can, that North Korea can do. But the country itself, for such a long time, isolated and regimented, that it will be an enormous tragedy and problem we are facing, whether it's collapsed or not. It's a big challenge.
There's a huge inertial component.
Right, that's right, inertial component. Because it's system-induced isolation, regime and leadership-induced isolation, and policy isolation, and geographical isolation. You have triple, quadruple isolation of North Korea. That has been going on for 50 years. And so you cannot just quickly decide or impose or anything like that. So that's why we need a cautious and persistent and patient approach to North Korea. You just cannot solve it very quickly.
Two questions. One, was there a flow of cash from South to North Korea? And secondly, to what uses was it put?
Well, I think that there is no simple answer to the complicated question. But this issue, which was brought up in the news and as well as in the National Assembly, and as a result of it, like in America, the special prosecutor is appointed. And just yesterday, actually, they appointed the associate special prosecutors. So let's wait until the full legal process is done. But I can tell you one thing, though, that is we have to have a big picture. That is Korea is the only country which is divided as a legacy of the World War II. And the President Kim Dae-jung, I'm talking about President Kim Dae-jung, had a vision and conviction and faith. And he made a tremendous progress and phenomenal developments. But there are, like any other countries, there's a political bickerings and looking at their own myopic bipartisan thinking and all that. So let's wait until the clear picture through the legal process is done.
Given the assumption that the United States is an impatient nation, what can Korea teach the United States about patience?
I don't know about U.S. impatience, but my wife is always telling me that how impatient I am. But I think my government and U.S. government are working closely together. And we have what they call TCOC, Trilateral Coordination and Oversight Group, among Japan, Korea, and the United States, particularly in dealing with North Korea. So we have been closely coordinating to each other our views, and sometimes we have differences, like wife and husband have differences, but we are getting along. And as I mentioned, that new President Roh Moo-hyun's inauguration was less than 2 months ago, but both presidents had a telephone conversation for 3 times, including this morning. And the basic message is that we try to resolve North Korean issues through diplomacy and peaceful way, in a peaceful way.
How would the withdrawal of American troops affect South Korea?
You know better than I do that I was sent as a diplomat not to answer hypothetical questions. And I'm just telling you what it is today. And once again, that overwhelming majority of the Koreans are grateful and support American troops and American presence, troop presence for the last 50 years has been productive, constructive, and pivotal, crucial, critical in maintaining peace and stability and security in the region, not just Korea, but also entire region. And we believe that now, because especially North Korea is still there. And even though North Korea is now providing mixed images, they are still a security threat. And that affects everybody, not just Korea and Japan and China and Russia, but also the United States.
How powerful is the South Korean military?
In terms of number, North Korea is about 1.1 million conventional forces. And South Korea has about 650,000 troops. And budget is about 3%. We have military defense attaché here.
2.7%.
So about 3% of our GDP is for defense spending.
Given the questioner's assumption that a reunification would be somewhat analogous to the reunification of the Germanys, why has the United States been reluctant to enthusiastically push in that direction?
That's a tough question. Well, as I said, that we are not dealing with larger question of unification per se, but we try to improve step by step, bit by bit, the reducing tensions and increasing cooperation and reconciliation with North Korea. And on that policy direction, that U.S. government and Korean government, and including Japanese government, have been coordinating together. But I must admit that you have a changing administration from Clinton administration to Bush administration, and there has been some subtle nuance, or even more than nuance, differences in dealing with North Korea. But as a friends, like husband and wife, you can see the disagreements or differences, and we try to still continuing to coordinate how to deal or engage North Korea.
You commented on this, I think, in your remarks, but would you comment upon the desirability of bilateral versus multilateral approaches in Asia?
To be frank with you, we have to have a time frame here. That is, North Korea started some provocative acts, such as expelling IAEA inspectors in the Yongbyon nuclear facilities and removing the camera seals and other provocative acts. By doing so, also the revelation of the secret or clandestine uranium-based nuclear projects, in addition to the plutonium-based nuclear weapons. These are the new developments. And so before these new developments, very provocative and negative developments, my government urged direct bilateral talk, because after all, there was a 1994 Geneva Agreement which sort of froze the plutonium-based nuclear projects. Instead, Korea and U.S. and EU and Japan tried to build a light water reactor, 2 light water reactors in Sinpo in North Korea. But because of these new developments, it's no longer a bilateral issue, because nuclear issue has become affecting not just the United States, but also Republic of Korea, Japan, China, and Russia, and all that. So it became multilateral issue. So my government agree with the U.S. position that it should be done or dealt with under the multilateral framework. Only concerns is that I mentioned in my speech that North Korea may not. This is a good framework because it will be win-win formula, because it will help eventually if North Korea abandon those nuclear projects and abandon those weapons of mass destruction programs or weapons of mass destructions, then we can provide some economic assistance or some security assurance as well. But the point is North Korea may not, because of somebody said inertia, that North Korea may not accept that this appealing, both winning and winning multilateral framework. In the meantime, instead of diffusing the tension, they may even escalate the tensions. Another fundamental issue we concern is if these countries are on an equal footing, America has a special status in Korea, in the region. America is not just China or Russia. As I said, America has 37,000 troops. For more than half a century, America has sacrificed, contributed substantially in human terms and financial terms in every aspect of interstate relations, tremendous investment in Korea. So we are afraid of impairing. That's why we need some American initiative in sort of triggering this stalemate and standoff.
Again, a hypothetical question, but what if diplomacy fails to curtail North Korea's programs, nuclear programs?
Well, I'm still playing diplomacy. And until, as long as I'm here, I'll play diplomacy. Yeah.
An example of potential friction between the two countries, some people might assume that the nuclear problem in North Korea is the American problem, since it's directed at us or perhaps other countries like Japan, and it's not necessarily a South Korean problem, and therefore a certain amount of friction is created between our two countries. Would you comment?
Sure. That's a fallacy, because North Korea invaded the South in 1950, and country was devastated, and nothing but ruins and ravages after the Korean War. And it was a fratricidal war. And even though those Koreans who remember or experience the Korean War are becoming minority, it's a history that North invaded the South. So if North Korea somehow is having a nuclear bomb or other weapons of mass destruction, it's a direct threat to us. It's not just TV screen war. To us, it's a life and death matter. So I don't know who are speculating that, but I don't think that's true. It is deadly serious matter, and my government position is under any circumstances, we cannot afford or allow or permit North Korea's both uranium or plutonium-based nuclear projects. Only thing is there are differences in intelligence assessment.
Does the exodus of North Koreans from their country help or hurt the Sunshine Policy?
The border between China and North Korea is quite porous, and as a result of it, that many refugees from North Korea, and then there are high concentration of Korean population in that area near China to North Korea. I don't know, it's very difficult to say, but it's a humanitarian issue and human issues, and my government is playing a very quiet, persistent, and active discussions and coordination with Chinese government and other surrounding governments all these years.
What are the resources of North Korea?
Well, it's quite an irony that in 1945, it's an oversimplification, but we call agricultural South and industrial North, because North Korea has all the minerals and hydroelectric plants and all that. But 50 years later, South Korea became industrial, and agriculture shrank from 80% farming population to about 7% farming population. Big change. North Korea is about 37, 38. Of course, we don't believe all those data, but according to the official data, it's about 38% still agricultural. But they have enormous natural resources. So as I said, that what kind of leadership, what kind of policy you pursue makes a lot of difference. We speak same language, we look alike. My wife is, for instance, from North Korea, but she's lucky that she married to a South Korean guy.
In many cases, there are alternative governments around the world. Is there any such thing for North Korea?
I read somewhere something like that, but it's much less active. Yeah, much less active. I wish they have, but much less active.
Question is, what can be the role of China diplomatically in this circumstance?
Well, again, it's Chinese authorities to answer, but let me just say that China has been playing its role in dealing with North Korea. And for the last 5 years, China has been very constructive and cooperative in my government's policy toward North Korea.
Mr. Ambassador, I think you've given us an extraordinarily full and rich presentation with respect to your policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.